Good afternoon, and welcome to the second installment of Sex Wars in Washington, D.C. on The Rich Urban Show. I'm your host, Rich Urban, coming to you from historic Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. This installment is entitled Defining the Battle. So, as I promised, I'm going to go over my experience working in Washington, D.C. because these things are still going on in so many communities, like even now in Fairfax County, they've just enacted a crazy sex education curriculum. So, inculcating things like transgenderism, all those kind of things. So, let me talk about my experience. So, I took training with the Relationship Intelligence Institute in the Free Teens curriculum in 1997. I decided, hey, this is really needed. Youth need to hear the message that abstinence from sex before marriage is the healthiest thing toward your future success. So I hit the streets running. I decided to contact all of the middle and high schools in Wards 6, 7, and 8 in Washington, D.C. That would be all the East River, if you know anything about Washington, D.C., the area east of the river, which is the area where has a lower income, more poverty, more broken families, etc., etc. So basically, I contacted, and also I was living on Capitol Hill East, so then that was included in the Ward 6, 7, and 8. So interestingly enough, instead of middle schools responding more, I had at that time was like, I faxed the schools something, I called them, I visited some schools. So we worked at several elementary schools, like Lecky Elementary School, Mary Terrell Elementary School, Brent Elementary School was one also where we did some presentations there. And at that time, the reason I contacted elementary schools was because 6th grade was still in the elementary school at that time. Now they shifted that to middle school, which, by the way, isn't a good idea. There's no academic benefit or social development benefit to that. But anyway, many school districts have done that anyway. So, right. So I thought it would be for the 6th graders, but I was surprised to find out, for instance, at one school, the counselor invited the 5th and 6th graders, because I work typically with the guidance counselors, and some of the 4th graders. She said, well, the 4th graders have been touching the girls inappropriately. Some 4th graders. I thought, wow. So, yeah. So, and then other 5th graders, like 10-year-olds, were saying they were, obviously pretty well versed in these topics of, that we would discuss in sex education and knew way too much. So, we did go to the schools, and I'm talking about here defining the battle in the title today. Well, what is a battle really? Well, really, when you think about the battle, it's whether or not, we believe that there are absolute values or societal values basically that are absolute, and most people would say come from the Creator God, or if everything is just relative. Because if everything's just relative, practically anything could be okay. I mean, you might argue it's not okay to kill someone, but where's the line drawn, as I shared last week? What's wrong with having sex with children? Hey, if God doesn't exist, the child says it's okay, hey, what's the big deal? And if you really think about it, you might think that sounds extreme, but this is really what's going on, as I showed last week, that a group, is promoting, basically, it's okay to have sex with children. And they do that under the guise of the First Amendment. Oh, we can't restrict people's right to speak, which is exactly what they do with anybody who wants to teach sexual abstinence in the schools, as we'll be outlining more as we go along. So actually, it really is a battle between absolute values and, relativistic values. And this battle is about the most important area of life, which is sexuality, love, life, lineage. Those are the key areas of life. So when you get into relativistic things, or thinking, then the line is muddied. What's okay? What's not okay? And one of the favorite things that Michelle Rhee, who much later than the time period I'm talking about, which is initially I was working in a number of schools between 1997 up till the time we started working with high schools in 2002, and high schools as well as middle schools and upper elementary, Michelle Reese used to have a mantra, the infamous former school chancellor of D.C. Oh, we always think about the well-being of the children. Yeah, right. Which is completely opposite. Really, it's about the well-being of adults. Like, hey, I'm an adult. I want the quote-unquote freedom to practice being a homosexual. Oh, but, we can have uh, the fact that, homosexuals, for instance, are 10 times more likely to abuse children, things like that. Also, it's about the preferences of adults. Oh, I am a same-sex couple. I want to adopt children. Oh, wow. Well, that's really statistically bad for children to live in relationships other than married parent families. And, these kind of things. Or we're cohabiting. Say, use that example. And we're going to go over a few of these examples right now. These things are statistically bad for children. But if you're just thinking about the desires and needs of adults, oh, that's fine. Oh, we're adults. You can't infringe our rights to live. Okay, do what you want. Perhaps that's okay. I mean, I don't condone that. But when you're talking about having children at home or adopted children, that's another story. So this is not about the rights of children. It's about whether you're going to recognize basic values that come from God or absolute values, or if you're going to just go into a culture that says you can do anything, basically anytime you want, virtually. So let's look at a few articles that show why it is so dangerous for children to live with only one of their parents. Or I should also add, or to live with neither of their parents. But anyway, to live in a situation where they're not married parents there, and especially dangerous if the boyfriend of the mother is living in the home. Let's look at that. Here's one article. It talks about an Iowa study. One of the most frequently cited pieces of research on the subject is a 1992 article in Child Abuse and Neglect. It took interview 1,000 Iowa women. 64% of the non-parental abuse in single-parent families was mother's boyfriend responsible for that, despite performing less than 2% of non-parental child care. This little girl was tragically killed by the mother's boyfriend that's featured in this article here. This is a more recent article, and you can find these, practically every week. Boyfriend 23 charged in child abuse case, April 2nd, 2018. His girlfriend's 5-month-old boy was hospitalized in mid-March with multiple injuries consistent of child abuse. The man was arrested, and he's getting a $500,000 bond. Here's another article. Now, this talks about a variety of different cases where children were killed by the mother's boyfriend. A new federal study indicates these cases tip of the abuse iceberg. Children living with their mother and her boyfriend are 11 times more likely to be sexually, physically, or emotionally abused than children living with their married biological parents. And are 6 times more likely to be physically, emotionally, or educationally neglected. However, even when the father and mother are living together, but they're not married, they're 4 times more likely sexually, physically, or emotionally abused. So the married household is the best and safest place for children. So why aren't we teaching kids to have safe sex before marriage? Because isn't that helping children to be successful? Isn't that in the best interest of children? Or isn't all this sex ed controversy not about the best interest of children, but about pushing the envelope on things like transgenderism, no-genderism, homosexuality, and every other kind of abomination and perversion? Isn't that what it's really about? Is that really about the best interest of children or the interest of adults? I think the answer is very clear. It's in the interest of adults, not children. This study of fatal child abuse in Missouri found that children living in their mother's boyfriends with their mother's boyfriends were more than 45 times more likely to be killed than were children living with their married mother and father. This study showed that 15.7% of 6 to 11-year-olds in cohabiting families had serious emotional problems versus just 3.5% of children in married parent households. Children in cohabiting households were more than twice as likely, or 116% more likely, to smoke marijuana compared to teens of an intact married family. But these kind of studies are often ignored by groups like, or are ignored by groups like the ACLU, which has its own agenda to gut these kinds of law in the interest of adults. So this is really a really serious factor. And as I said, you know, even the people who are promoting supposedly things like anti-censorship, like I covered last week, what they're really trying to do is legitimize any kind of sexual relationship, even sex of old people with children, pedophilia. They want to legitimize that and make it okay. And also when you talk about homosexuality, that's a really interesting thing, because if you have a vagina, you know you're a man. I mean, sorry, a woman. At least until recently. If you have a penis, you know you're a man. At least until recently, I say, unless you're, you know, the recent so-called science, which is not science, pushing that there's a bunch of different genders. This is lunacy. However, and that would feed into the homosexual agenda in the sense that, how do you know you're homosexual? Say you're a child. It's not so unusual for children perhaps to feel some attraction to the same sex at some point. But, you know you're a girl, you have a vagina, you know you're a boy, you have a penis, but how do you know you're homosexual? Well, unless you actually fulfill that through having some kind of sexual contact, you know, then it's just an idea. It doesn't become substantiated. It's just like, oh, I think I'm attracted to girls. Okay. Does that could happen to a lot of people. In fact, statistically, you know, it happens to a certain percentage of girls or a certain percentage of boys think they're attracted to boys. But if they don't fulfill that, and, you know, with some kind of homosexual acts, or they aren't abused by someone, you know, with, you know, pedophile sex or homosexual sex, any kind of sexual abuse, then they would never know that. You know, do you see what I'm saying? It's only fulfilled by the actual act of doing it. I wonder if this is one reason why so many, you know, homosexual activists are so adamant about that. They want to justify that. Because if there's no sexual contact, it's just an idea. So this whole thing is so evil. So you really, by encouraging or allowing or saying that children should fulfill their sexual feelings, and then saying, oh, it's okay to have homosexual feelings, or even, of course, you can fulfill heterosexual feelings. But by encouraging this, it's playing into the whole adult, how do you say, concerns or perversions of homosexuality, transgenderism, etc., and not looking at the interests of children. And of course, if you're teaching sexual abstinence, that totally is against that. That just makes them go ballistic. Oh my gosh, you're negating their very being. What do you mean? I feel like I'm homosexual and I can't have homosexual sex, you know, as a, you know, say teen, or not you can't, but you're not supposed to. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Actually, it's good. No children should be having sex. That's in the best interest of children. So here we're talking about people pushing adult agendas, homosexuality, transgender, every kind of other perversion, and really, sorry for flicking through that, damaging, you know, children, even up to 45 times more damage to the children with cohabiting boyfriends. But yet people don't want to say, as I said, even in my local school board, they can't even say, yes, abstinence is the best thing for children. Let's teach that. This is lunacy. So this is a real battle in the sex wars. How did everything become so relativistic? What happened to the Christian people? What happened to the godly people? What happened to good people standing up saying, no, we're not going to teach this crap to our children, that everything is relativistic? No, my children are not animals. They are human beings, and they can make decisions, to engage in sex or not to engage in sex, which is really, like the fundamental question. Are we animals or are we higher beings? So I want to leave things on that thought. I hope you enjoyed this second installment of Sex War as we define the issue, and I walk through with you my experiences in the District of Columbia with teaching sex education. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Do like, do share, do comment. That may help someone else, along their journey. I am Rich Urban signing out from Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Good night.